So it's just like you're very excited when you see worms in your bed, but your worms are eating your organic material. They are not grinding up the gravel that's in there. They're eating the organics. So while the worm castings make excellent fertilizer and are worth their weight in gold, quite literally if you try and buy it, they are actually using up some of the organics. So you have to be prepared to replenish that every single year. Anytime I reuse a bucket, I tell people, okay, I've used this bucket, I pulled out the cabbages or whatever else is in there, I clear out most of the roots, I don't worry about the tiny ones unless it's something that's going to come back, like potatoes.
I was just going to say,
potatoes or sweet potatoes. Most other things won't come back from the roots. So that's cool. Now I top dress it. I put on anywhere from 2 to 4 inches of new potting soil in there and a couple of handfuls of organic slow-release fertilizer.
You know, when Irene says that she does it, if you think about our greenhouse, arguably both of us might be able to work in there at one time. It's really tight, and really it's a one-person job.
Yeah.
If you're trying to fill a 10-gallon bucket.
Right. Henry comes in to help with the hydroponics. That's his big thing. And he does all the fooding for that. And he helps move tables and stuff like that. But usually he's doing some other thing. I mean, you know, you need to spread yourself around. And
there's plenty of things to get spread around on our homestead.
Yes. So look at how much water you can afford. It doesn't make sense to put in a garden and then have to let it sit there and watch it die because you can't afford the water. We've been watching several people around the United States in different areas, even in Texas, where they don't normally suffer from a lack of water. They're in an area that doesn't usually go into serious drought. They're not in the panhandle. And they had to figure out how to do water haul. And we watched somebody down in the Benson area have the same problem this past year. They normally have enough water from water collection.
Not last year.
Not last year. Sometimes you get a monsoon. Sometimes you just don't get the water. Sometimes you don't have enough storage, so you get 4 inches of water in an hour. Everything's now full. Now you get more. Where does it go?
It goes away.
It goes away. Now that doesn't sound awful, except for the fact that maybe you don't get any later.
Okay, so the first thing you do is you check your soil to see what you have.
Right.
Around here it's likely to be alkaline. You'll need to be adding some way to reduce the acidity in your first year. You may be able to change that long haul. We prefer to plant in buckets when you first get started for sure. So that's number one.
Buckets or raised beds.
So number one is the soil type that you have. Number two is the water requirements. If you look at that water, if you look at the water requirements for that 5-plant tomato bed, you're going to use at least 120 gallons a month. Mm-hmm. And you're going to use more than that because you have to figure in the amount of actual evaporation and transpiration from the plants because it actually uses more water here.
Right.
And if you're planting on top of gravel, the one thing I'll tell you is that gravel doesn't hold water at all.
It zooms right on through. And when we have high winds, you know, they'll talk about fire weather. They didn't used to hear about that anywhere else except for California and the Southwest. Now you hear about it a lot of places. Texas caught on fire the other day because of fire weather. All it takes is an idiot throwing a cigarette out a window, and the next thing you know, the whole field's on fire, and now it's taken out 6 houses, you know? So they had that happen in West Texas the other day. When we get that kind of weather, the amount of transpiration, that's the water lost from a plant, is huge. There are times during the middle of the day when no matter how much, they could be sitting in a bucket of water, they cannot keep up. So your big leaf things like squash and stuff like that often will wilt here in the middle of the day. Now by 5 o'clock, they're usually fine again. It's not that they didn't have enough water. They couldn't draw it up fast enough, no matter what they did, to be able to keep up with the amount of liquid that they were losing out of their leaves. It's one of the reasons we actually use row covers or partial row covers or shade covers here to reduce that, protecting them from the wind. Any kind of a windbreak you can create for your plants makes a huge difference. That's why there's a big difference. We're watching a family in Mississippi right now that has moved from a hollow where they rarely got high winds up to the top of a hill. And as I told my husband, wow, that's going to be a learning curve, because where they could forget to water for a day or two down in the hollow, and it was just fine because it's Mississippi, the water runs down into the hollow, it's always damp. In fact, they had water problems there. They were always putting in new drainage. On the top of that hill, despite the fact that they've got very good soil and stuff, they've been told it's some of the best farming soil in the area. That's awesome. That means they don't have to do a lot of these other things that we would have to do. But they're going to be watering like crazy. And dollars to donuts, when they first start, there's going to be some screw-ups. Because you think you got it covered. I mean, we screw up here, and we've been doing this for 17 years. You think you got it covered. You have been watching the temperature outside. It's really not that hot. But you forget that dry wind that's just sucking the moisture out of those plants. You go out there, everything looks like it's dead. Now, chances are it's not. But has it had a setback? Yeah, probably. So what you have to do is you have to look at what you personally have. Basically, anything that can grow in your climate in terms of temperature can probably grow where we live. Farther south from us, you can grow citrus with little, if any, cover in some areas. Only some areas. We're talking microclimates here. You know, one of our goals long term is we would like to put in a Chinese greenhouse and see if we could keep something like a Meyer lemon, because that would be a whole game changer for us.
So far, we understand our soil if we're going to try and plant in the ground, which I don't recommend in our area. Some parts of northern Arizona you can.
Right.
Because there's enough soil, it's good enough quality soil, you can do it. So we've dealt with the soil. We've talked about water and the needs of water. We use about 1,000 gallons a week, 1,000 gallons every 2 weeks when we're in the height of production here on our place, because
in the summer,
because we have so many beds and so many plants.
Right.
We've moved a lot of our production into the greenhouse because it's protected.
Right.
The next thing that we need to really talk about are varieties and seed types. I started off by talking about ancient seeds. These are seeds that really are more than 1,000 years old. They've been able to be grown successfully historically in the wintertime with very little or no watering.
Right.
That's all changed because the waterfall has changed dramatically in the past 5 or 6 years where we live. Now, the particular question, that pointed question that I got was, what varieties should I grow? Now, this person is going to be slightly higher in elevation than we are. They will have colder weather longer over the year. They will have snow earlier and later than we do. Now, what varieties are you going to grow? Well, a lot of people, especially a lot of hardcore homesteaders, will say, grow open pollinated, grow heritage breeds, grow those kinds of old seeds, old types. Well, one of the things you need to understand is those heritage breeds were developed many years ago, mostly in the central United States.
Right. Which has a specific set of climate requirements. They were not intended ever for use in extreme climates. So the tomatoes that were developed in the Midwest don't function in Florida. They don't function in Alaska, and they don't function in the American Southwest.
Well,
they just don't.
They definitely don't function easily here.
They will be losing their. Okay, we watched a guy the other day on Haas Tools. His specialty is seeds, and he was talking about the need to go to F1s. Now, an F1 is a hybrid. It does not mean that any genetic modification has been done to the plant. What it means is you took plant A and plant B, you crossed them, and you cross them by the normal way things cross in the yard. Pollen from one is taken and put on the flowers of the other one, and magic.
No engineering
besides what God gave us.
Ancient engineering. And,
yes.
And everything.
So it creates a plant that is sturdier. A lot of the original OP varieties developed before the introduction of all the modern diseases. These diseases have come from all over the world. Sometimes they have a clue where they came from, sometimes they don't. If you have ever studied history, You know that in the 1800s, it was, I think, the Irish potato famine.
I forget. It was
Yeah,
in
I think it was the 1800s. Thousands and thousands of people starved to death because the local people had decided that growing potatoes was a great way to stay alive. The climate was tolerant of the potatoes. This was great. They could make it work. Potatoes produce a lot of carbohydrates for the amount of space and effort that it went in to grow them. So they focused their efforts on potatoes as a huge portion of their diet. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, came it's a fungus. Came the fungus that caused it's a blight, which is a type of fungus, caused the potato famine. The potatoes died. They got no harvest. There was no FEMA in those days. There was no fallback position in those days. You either made your food or you went hungry. They died. They died in droves, or they came to the United States. That's why we had such an influx of Irish to the United States at that time frame. If you rely strictly on OP, you may do great. You may be lucky that your area doesn't have early blight, late blight. Every time I do more studies, there's more ones that I have to look up the details of because it's like, and what the heck is that? I don't remember any of those things when I was a kid. Any of them. Does it mean they didn't exist? Yeah, they existed somewhere. But the problem has been with all the mushing around of stuff between areas of the United States, between different countries, between different places in the world, this stuff has become rather a free-flowing situation. So now, like if you talk to that seed guy on Haas, he'll tell you that there's a line of demarcation between where this particular type of blight only goes up to about South Georgia, and the rest of the United States doesn't have to deal with it. Okay, that means that the area from South Georgia south is wetter and warmer. So that area there is going to have to, if they want to succeed, deal with plants that can tolerate that. That doesn't mean they're immune. It just means that they can tolerate it. One of the types of basil that we're trying to grow this year, it's a new one for us. It's been in field trials for years. I just watched a video this week. They showed at the end of season, and you know how plants get kind of shaggy at the end of season. It doesn't matter if they're the healthiest plant in the world all summer. By the time it's fall, they're looking a little less than cheerful. But they had all these different kinds of basil in a field, with a foot row in between them. So if there's any contagion going on, it's going to be there. And downy mildew is a big disaster for basil, and it destroys basil by the acre. They showed all these regular old ones. I recognize the purple one, the Genovese, all these other kinds there. And then there's the new varieties that they brought out. They look better than most of my Genovese looks at the beginning of the season.
Choosing the variety you're going to grow is an interesting problem.
Mm-hmm.
We encourage you to poll your local area. By local area, people who live at the same altitude in the same area, and find out what they're growing and how much effort they put into growing those plants. Because we can grow a lot, Irene and I can grow a lot of things here.
Yes.
And we grow a lot of things that nobody else can grow or do grow because it's hard to make it work.
But we're willing to fuss with things. You have to ask yourself, how much willing am I to fuss with things? And, okay, between January and now, we have bought one vegetable at the grocery store. Henry picked up some green onions for me.
Actually, yeah, and since Thanksgiving, there's been a total of 4 servings of other vegetables.
Right, that were purchased. And some of them were not things that we had to have. It was just something we wanted to have. Like, we wanted some real bigger baking potatoes, and we don't have any left from the summer. So we picked up a couple of baking potatoes. How important to people that you are talking to is their level of production? We've got friends who grow a couple of pots with maybe a basil, maybe a tomato, maybe a pepper in it, and they are totally happy with that. There is nothing wrong with that. But if the amount of produce that you make in your garden is going to be the difference between whether you eat well or you don't eat well, you have to look at that. So for us, do we grow any OP? Some open pollinated stuff? Yes, we do. We do grow several varieties of tomatoes that are OP. We grow some carrots that are OP. A lot of the lettuce that we grow is OP. But the ones we rely on, the ones that we count as the backbone of our production, are either varieties that are stable, what do they call that? Stable hybrids. Stable hybrids. In other words, they have taken and worked with that, so to the point where you can actually use the seeds, so they become open pollinated, if you will.
We have several stable hybrids that we grow. Some because we like what the fruit is.
Mm-hmm.
We have a tomato that I really adore.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really great tomato for a tomato sandwich.
Mm-hmm. But I don't rely on it for tomato sauce.
That's a stable hybrid, and it does all right. It has some very good qualities and some less good qualities.
Right, but it's susceptible to blight.